Hello, my name is James Green. I'm the Director of Air and Land Platforms as well as Military Capabilities at Janes, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's briefing on the global military ground vehicle market, which is, I'm delighted to say, being presented by two key members of our land team. First of all, Principal Analyst Nelson Fisk, who will speak first, and he will be followed by our Senior Analyst, Daksh Nakra. Our land team covers both our technical equipment profile content as well as today's focus, our market forecasts and program tracking products. We cover about 40 events each year, and it's available to all of our customers who subscribe to either our Intelligence Center or Janes module products, including today's focus, the market forecast products. So just before I hand over to Nelson, I just wanted to say a couple of words about the information used to compile today's presentation. So it's been drawn from our military ground vehicles market forecast product. So what we try and do with markets forecast is to develop an accurate, actionable set of market information so that our customers can spend less time gathering data and more time on analysis, planning, and indeed decision-making. Markets forecast is in effect a hybrid forecast. It relies on both near-term contracts and long-term budgetary trends to provide an accurate forecast of sales revenue for our customers. So it relies on a bottom-up methodology, particularly in the near term, but it also takes into account long-term budgets. We track contracts where they are available, so we have something like 80,000 records across our 20 market forecast databases. Many of these are represented by current contracts, but there's also a number that are composed of stated opportunity records. So these are records that represent our assessment of the revenue associated with programs that have been officially announced in one way or another. And over the longer term, we use our knowledge of near-term contracts as well as our assessments of future requirements, be they new capabilities, one-for-one replacements, or perhaps modernization of existing equipment, to come up with what we call derived opportunities. And finally, we have a further wedge that we called unidentified R&D, which in effect we compare the total value of the R&D forecast for a country to the expected R&D for that country and add a record that accounts for the value of the R&D that we believe to be missing in our forecast. So that's just a little bit of contextual background about the product that is driving today's briefing. So with that, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Nelson.
Thanks, James. Good day, everyone. This first slide shows the overall view for the military ground vehicle market, which is forecast to grow at a compound annual rate, or CAGR, of 6.83% from 2017 to 2021, and has a market value of $445 billion over the next 10 years. And by the way, this is up somewhat over our last 10-year forecast of $430 billion and a 4.19% CAGR. And this is a positive sign for the military ground vehicle market, not so much for the world, of course, due to some of the situations, but things like Russia's aggression in the Crimea, China's expansion in the South and East Asia seas, a significantly increased and sustained Middle East instability with ISIS, and now also a Russian component in Syria. I think also with the new President Trump, there's also a higher probability that military spending will see an uptick. But we'll have to wait and see, of course, how the budget fight plays out. This slide covers a look at the market from a supplier point of view, again with a pie chart showing the share of the market and the table with CAGR and forecast. The suppliers as well as end user countries will be covered in a little bit more detail as we look at the regions. However, of note is the fact that while China and Russia enjoy high market share and forecast values, they're largely unaddressable markets for suppliers, relying instead on their state-owned industries. General Dynamics comes in second, but is a leader in the market when the state-owned factors of its competitors are removed. General Dynamics has approximately double the forecast of its next challenger, BAE, and Oshkosh is in the 5th spot due to their Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, or JLTV, which is that's the replacement for the Humvee. Trucks have become more than trucks as the front lines have blurred on the current battlefield, and protected vehicles like JLTV have made really what used to be truck suppliers into protected vehicle suppliers. One more view with a little more detail in the comparison of new production versus other type of production, like as James was mentioning, upgrades, modifications, and resets. For the purposes of our forecast, if a vehicle is reset or restored to 0 mileage, or if it receives an upgrade in capability, or if it's just modified, that all falls into the modification category rather than new build. New builds have a CAGR of 6.6%, and the overall forecast for new production is $343 billion over the 10 years. The upgrade market is much smaller, but a very good CAGR of 9.35% and a $53 billion market forecast. And it does make sense, of course. New builds are much more expensive than upgrading. Modifications actually make sense in this era of budget cuts. And as an example, in the U.S., the only real new build program is the JLTV.
We can very well relate from Nelson's introduction that 2016 marked the end of 6-year retreat in European defense spending, as countries throughout the region reassess their defense and security policies and strategic objectives to counter the perceived threat from Russia. Europe is emerging as the leading regional spender, with spending anticipated to exceed $90 billion during 2016 to 2025. While Middle East procurements have, however, proved largely resilient to cuts, despite the headline reduction seen in 2016. Governments left exposed to the collapse in oil prices by high energy sector dependence have made efforts to reduce state spending while affording protection to defense and security budgets. Russian spending is likely to be restrained due to budget sequester. However, it may not want to further delay the timetable for the modernization of the Russian armed forces. So we may see procurements driven by diverting funds from obscure federal budget heads. With this as prelude, let's evaluate the projected performance of the industry in EMEA. About a quarter of the 10-year forecast, amounting to $54 billion, represents stated and derived opportunities yet to be awarded to a supplier. The largest supplier by revenue remains unchanged, General Dynamics, with a total 10-year forecast of $30.9 billion, owning nearly 16% of the major supplier's pie. And lastly, Russia. Russia has slipped in terms of overall forecast, which is now $20.2 billion, down approximately $3 billion over the 10-year period. But with a strong 5-year CAGR of 9.8%, driven by the continued, albeit lower than previously expected, investments in next-generation vehicles such as the T-14 Armata, Kurganets 25, and K-16/K-17 BTR Boomerang armored fighting vehicle families. China is followed by South Korea, where the defense spending under the new midterm defense plan 2016-2020 was announced to increase by an average of 7.2% per annum. However, 2016 and 2017 budget outlay reflected just 3.6% and 4% increments respectively. So South Korea's 0.9% 5-year CAGR and $25 billion market value accounts for 5.6% of the worldwide MGV market. Prominent programs under acquisition are the 300 K9 self-propelled howitzers, 10 batteries of KM SAM systems, 100 K2 Black Panther tanks, about 500 KWT 8x8 APCs, and 131 K21 tracked IFVs.
Just to summarize, folks, the heightened global tensions, I think, have kept the military ground vehicle market on a positive trend, even in the face of stagnant budgets and, for the U.S., a pivot to Asia. I think one of the bigger trends is that the lines between these functional segments are blurring. As I mentioned, tanks are taking on, or infantry fighting vehicles are taking on more of a tank role, trucks taking on more of an APC roles, and so forth.
I'd also say that a very similar version of this briefing is available as part of our Defense Insight Report series. We publish 20 Defense Insight Reports a year, covering land platforms, air platforms, sea platforms, C4ISR, and weapons. So we publish 4 each year on land platforms, for example. And the version that is very similar to what you've heard today is already available as a Defence Insight report on the Janes website. So thank you again for joining us. Thanks to Nelson and Daksh. Next week's briefing will take a look at the situation in Libya, the crisis on the ground there, and we'll assess the likelihood of a military or political resolution to the conflict, given that there are several governments vying for power. So the Janes analysts will be looking at the composition of the various armed groups in the country, the distribution of forces and equipment across Libya, as well as the impact of regional assistance and whether it could decisively tip the scales of the conflict. So if that's of interest to you or colleagues, please join us for that.